there, it's Linda from Lányos Handmade, and today we're going to sew the copper pack from Cork and Copper Designs. I'm going to put the link for the pattern in the notes and also the link for her Facebook group so that you can follow along with me and you can post your makes afterwards in her group. Now, I stuck to some lightweight materials for mine. This is vinyl from Atelier Fibre Arts. I don't know if they have this one anymore. I bought up a lot of it because I really liked it, but it's quite lightweight and it sews really well, and it's very sturdy and strong too. The other thing that I used is rainbow hardware from RC Threadcraft, and I'll put the links for both these things in the notes below. And also the lining was actually repurposed, so I can't really put the link down there for that, but it's got some cute animals on it. And these were repurposed too. I got these from another bag that I ripped apart that was falling apart, and took all the backpack stuff off of it, and I've reused it here. So keep that in mind too. You can use repurposed materials. You don't always have to buy brand new. And I'm quite happy with my option. Mine, you can put an iPad inside and just use it for a day pack. That's the choices I made. There's a zipper pocket inside and also a little netted pocket that I can put my iPad in so it stays put. I've also used the lanyard option that she has. And she's got other options too. She has a front chest strap, but I didn't use that option. I did use the option to put the D-rings on here just in case I want to clip something else on. And of course I don't have the hydration pack option for mine or the G-tube feeding system, but those are other quite useful options too. I think they're very important. And of course then the other option I put in the video is the hack for the handle. Sometimes you just want to carry it. You don't want it on your back or shoulder. This is a pattern for a confident beginner. I did sew mine on a domestic machine. The reason why I say confident is because there are a lot of curves when you're sewing this pattern. The outside, the zipper flap, and also the straps. There's also binding here. I used fold over elastic, which I find really easy to use, but some people don't like it. And you could also use regular, like bias binding, or a waterproof, water resistant canvas. I would stick to lightweight materials though. And when I was doing it in the pattern, I didn't forget to stick the lining on the back, but I stuck the lining on the back at the very last moment, and it's out of order from what she did, but it still works. So if you follow me, you won't mess it up. If you follow the pattern, then you're a smart cookie. Okay, let's start. Straps first, which I always like. I kind of patched this together because I didn't want to waste my foam. So first I'm going to zigzag across here and make this one piece. Then after I get that sorted out, I am going to attach the foam to these pieces. I'll have to match them up. Somewhere along the way here they match. Yep. So this one's going to get sewn on here, and this one is going to get sewn on here. I am just going to zigzag around the edge. I think she said how wide of a seam allowance she wanted in the pattern, but I'm just going to zigzag around. And then I'll come back to you and show you what the next step is. Okay, that's sewed on now. I zigzagged it. Make sure your zigzagging is not so wide that it's wider than the seam allowance that she recommends. And you'll notice I was kind of sloppy with cutting my foam, so I have to trim this off without cutting my stitches, which I'm used to doing. And then let's put these two pieces together. And sew these two pieces with the recommended seam allowance. after I sew them together, she says to sew them and then turn it out and top stitch it down so there's less thickness here after you sew them. Okay, there we go. This is put together now. Now let's go do the same thing with the lining. I don't have any shape flex on here. I was going to interface this, so I am going to go interface this. I forgot to cut my interfacing out, but it will be the same thing. These pieces will be interfaced, and we will sew them together and then turn them around. I'm just going to press them because they'll stay down nice enough since it's all fabric. Okay, we've got both of them done now. Things are so much easier to sew when they're stabilized and they're not flopping around. And of course, seams are nicely pressed. Now, if we were making a tube, we would put right sides together, but we're not making a tube, thank heavens, because it would be terrible to try and turn it. What we are going to do is we're going to sew the wrong sides together. So I'm going to clip this all the way around. I have to get my clips. So it's all clipped on now. Now I'm going to, I think I'll zigzag around again too, just catch my edges. Make sure you catch both edges together so this doesn't fall apart. And then after I have to trim off this still because we don't need that excess on there. So I'm going to sew these two pieces together. Okay, now that I've got my lining and my exterior layer sewn together and I've trimmed it down, I'm going to put on the, I've got fold over elastic, but you can use all sorts of things she describes in the pattern. And I'm going to clip it on here. And I'm not going to do this part because that attaches to the backpack. And as I go around, I'm going to slightly pull on it and clip it. And then when I sew on it, it'll sew down nicely. Like I said, there's other methods, other things you can use, strips of that waterproof canvas or bias tape. She's got more in the pattern and describes how to use it. But I'm going to go all the way around and then I'm going to sew it down. If you're having trouble sewing it, you remember you can always sew the bottom side down because sometimes it helps with binding too. Sew the bottom side down first and then fold over the top and sew the top side down neatly along the edge. And then that way it won't be slipping as much and you won't worry about it. But I think I'm going to give it a shot, and now that I've got it clipped, and just sew through everything. You can see it on both sides there. And then I'll come back and show you. Okay, it's all clipped around. I'm going to sew it now. I was just going to say, you'll notice I didn't cut any off. I'll wait till I'm finished and see how far it goes, because maybe as I'm sewing this, I'll have to tighten it or loosen it again. So we really don't know how much of this is going to cover around, especially considering that this is a bit stretchy and bias tape itself is a bit stretchy too. So I've got the whole long length and I'm just going to sew around right now. You can also zigzag it if you want along the edges, you know, depends. Maybe you've got a fancy stitch you want to use. So I'm going to just sit down at the sewing machine and see what happens, what kind of stitch I pick. Okay, I've got this all sewn on. Don't forget to check to make sure everything is inside. You haven't missed any little gaps, anything falling out. The other thing I was going to say is I use this little gizmo, although this is not what it's used for. This is the electronic, you know, the pad on my sewing machine where you press the buttons. This is what you're supposed to use. But anyway, I use it to make sure when I'm sewing, I can shove the bits and pieces under. I can't even remember what the name of it is. Anyway, I use this to make sure that the little edges were under without running over my fingers. So this piece is done and we can put it aside. Now we're going to work on the zipper. And I've marked the center of my zipper. You don't need the pulls on yet. And I've marked the center of this piece and the center of this piece. First, we're going to just baste this together so that we can sew it on. I am also, once I get it basted, going to edge stitch or top stitch down here because my vinyl is kind of spongy and it's not going to lie flat ever unless I do that. So after we baste this and I top stitch that, I can put it down on top of my zipper, match up the centers again, and I can baste it on here. And then I'll come back and show you what we do with this piece. Okay, I had a moment of panic there because I couldn't remember if I put my zipper right side up or right side down, but I've got it on there right. There's the flap that's going to cover it. I did top stitch this with a really long stitch because it's not going to sit flat otherwise, just because of this vinyl. These two pieces were sewn together and then they were sewn to the zipper. Next we have to match up the centers again and we have to sew this curve on here. And sewing curves is probably the only challenge you'll have with this pattern because, you know, on the strap there's curves and here there's curves. So that's about the only thing that's probably going to drive you bonkers. I'm going to line this up and sew it down. And if you think you're going to have some trouble sewing it down, what you can do is sew this way and then flip it over and sew that way. So you're always, you know, coming towards you. You might, you know, however makes you feel better when you're sewing. Sometimes you have a certain direction you like going in. So you can sew just half and then sew the other half. So this is how it's going to look when it's finished, when it's sewed on. We'll add a lining in a minute, but right now I'm just going to use the seam allowance she suggests and sew down and sew that on. So that's sewed on now. So let's make a sandwich of this now. Let's flip it over and let's do the same with the lining on the other side. Make sure our centers are lined up. We'll clip it all down and then we can fold them both back. Okay, I've got it all sewn together. I'm going to pull it up and top stitch it down. First, I'm going to clip all around here. I'd like to sew along here just to try and keep all this funny bunching stuff here nice and smooth. It'll help later when I'm trying to sew it. So just baste it up there just a little bit. I can always take the stitches out if they get in the way. And remember, this is going to be curved like this. So now we can top stitch. I hope I'm not shaking the camera. Now we can top stitch along here. There, now that we've got our top body and our zipper flap and our zipper sewn together, remember it's going to be on a curve like that. Let's push this aside and we'll sew our middle and side body. Now you'll notice we start off straight here and then we kind of lose it. This is a curve and I'm going to lift it off the ground here and pin it so the edges match because they're supposed to, and not put it flat on the table. I want it to be bent like this, just as long as my edges match together. And there will be an overhang at the top, so it's probably best that you start sewing from the bottom and go up. But we're going to have to sew it and let it curve. And the same goes for the other side, because when you're finished, it's going to be like a turtle shell. So you see it won't lie flat, it'll be curved up. Make sure the bottoms match. And you're going to have a bit hanging over on both sides. Okay, I've got one side done and I just wanted to show you something. I basted it with a zigzag stitch, and then I sewed it with the seam allowance she suggested. And when I was sewing, I had it like this going through my machine because it was nice and smooth here. And then it wrapped around my little free arm on my machine. So it came through like this, and it sewed a nice bend in it. You'll see that it is bent. And the free arm really helped me sewing it around the free arm. Now, of course, I want to use the free arm on this side too, but there are no markings on this side of my machine, so I put a line where the seam allowance is supposed to be, and I'm going to sew along the free arm again and let it curl around the free arm. And that way I'll get the nice curve in it. And we have our little clam shell here. See, it worked really well. Now I'm going to push these into the center and top stitch. And I think I'm going to use a little bit of double-sided tape right underneath here and push it so that it kind of tacks it down a little bit so that I can actually sew it nice and neatly, because I don't want it wobbling around inside when I'm sewing. So I'll put some double-sided tape here, press it down perfectly, very carefully. And then when I come to this side, it'll be already kind of sticky down, and I can top stitch on the inside along here, right along here. So I've got one side done, top stitched, and you can see the nice little clamshell on it. Okay, that piece is done. Now we can do the exact same thing with the lining piece. You'll notice that this is pretty much straight, but this is not. So I'm going to pick it up here, not lay it on the table, and put some pins in. And I will sew it the same way. I will baste it, and then I will stitch it, and we will end up with the same clamshell. Now this one I can press with the iron. Actually, one of the testers had the idea of using a tailor's ham. This is a tailor's ham. It's good for pressing on curves. So you can press the curve into here nicely in order to top stitch it. You don't really need the double-sided tape for this one. So I'm going to get these pinned properly. Remember, the bottoms match, but the tops won't. There, now I can sew that together. Now that we've done the first one, the exterior one, this one's going to be easy. Okay, there we go. This is done. I didn't do what she said in the pattern. She said in the pattern, go this way with your seam allowance so that you reduce bulk, because this one went to the center, so this one should go to the side. So we shall see if that causes me any stress, but it's done. And this one I put on the chair and sat on, and yet the clamshell is still pretty good. Okay, so now we're going to put on this piece. This is our zipper, right? And we want to have it attached so it looks pretty like that, right? So let's flip it over and line up the centers. I think I might get a pin because it's a slip-in. There. So we shall sew this on the curve just like we sewed the top of it on a curve. We can do it. Just follow along and clip it through. So I'm going to sew around this curve. Just with the baste. And then it'll be finished after we get it all sewn and top stitched and put the line on it. Okay, so now we've got the zipper half here. So let's sew the zipper half on our lining now. Make sure you line up your centers. I might pin this because I like to have a little bit of security here. And it's all on the seam allowance if you did want to go through and pin. Otherwise, I'm going to clip it all. Okay, so it's clipped. So now when you sew it, the little zipper is going to pop out here. And then we can join it up with the zipper pull with this piece. But for now, let's get this sewed together. Okay, I sewed it on and I top stitched it, and there's a good reason for her saying get your seams facing different ways. I've got both mine facing the center, and my machine complained a bit here and here. So it is easier to sew, obviously, if you have your seams facing opposite ways all the time. Now I can put my zipper pulls on and put this back together. And I've got two little froggies here. I can put one on each end. And then that way I can have a double zipper pull. Okay, I ran my zipper pull once just to close it. And I'll put it through the second time to get it actually on there. Now I've got both my froggy pulls on there. And if you think there's too much of a gap or something sloppy between, you know, run them through again and try it again until you're happy with what you've got, okay? Because, you know, these things don't always feed in exactly right. I mean, I might be okay here because the amount of distance that's overhanging here is pretty much the same as the one overhanging here. So I think this might be okay. But check and see. See if you like the way it looks. Two buddies sitting there talking to each other. Next, the thing that we're going to do is get this to sit down. Now, along here, we are going to baste it. Put these two layers together. So I'm going to clip all the way around and then baste all the way around. I don't have to baste this because I've done it already, but I am going to baste this down because we want this flap to sit down and not pop up. Our little clamshell's done. And we've got our zipper opening, our inside. I'm pretty happy with this. We've got our double zip. And our two little froggies hiding under there. Now we can move on to the back. This is foam. This is the back. And this is the lining. First, we're going to put a pocket in the lining before we do anything else. So I've got to find my pocket. Here's my pocket pieces. And we shall put the pocket in the back with another zipper and pull. I'm going to go interface these because they don't have any interfacing on them. Okay, next step. I've got my interfacing on my pocket. This is my zipper pocket lining and my back of my pack. And this will be the other piece of the pocket. I love that print. And I've drawn on the zipper box, and you have to sew along the lines of the zipper box. And then after cut a slit in, I'll show you what the slit looks like after I sew around. If you hit the corners, keep your needle down and turn. You want to make sure you poke right into that corner. All four corners. Okay, the box is sewn. I went off the line a little bit here, but I made sure that I poked down into the corner, even if I had to hand crank to get it there. Okay, go as close to that stitching as you can, but do not cut that stitching. If you cut that stitching, there's going to be big trouble. I mean, literally, if I cut that stitching, I would probably sew the box again and go past where I cut the stitching because you don't want to have that stitching messed up. So now we can turn this. Inside, and I'm going to go press it. Sometimes I press it just flat like that, right? Just to get it to lie down. Press it flat, and then it makes it easier to fold it in there. Okay, but we want it really sharp and crisp. So I'm going to go work at it until it's sharp and crisp, even on the edges here. Let's poke these through. You want to make sure those are sharp and crisp. There, I've pressed it very, very well. Now I've got my tape on here, my double-sided tape, and it's sticking to my fingers more than it's sticking to me. I'm just going to stick this little frog inside here so maybe he doesn't get in the way. So now we can place this on top of here, centered nicely. I can see it. And I'll adjust it again. I always check the other side too, because sometimes I've had it so crooked. Oh, that's not bad. It's centered there. Sometimes I've had it so crooked I've had nothing here and all the extra on this side. I mean, you cut off the extra anyway, but I just would prefer it to be centered. And I run my little finger through here to try and make sure that it's centered this way too. Let's pull Froggy back. Close it up. See, I can see it's a little crooked here. A little bit of adjusting. So now we can sew it on. I'm going to use my edge stitch foot because I can go along here nicely, and I have to be really careful at the ends because the guide gets stuck here. So I just lift it up a bit so that the guide can go over this. And keep your needle down, turn the corner, and move your zipper pull out of the way as you sew. So that will finish off part of that. Then I guess the next thing we do is we just put the back of the pocket on. But let me sew around here first. There, that's sewed on now. Now you can see on the other side we've got some overhang here. We can snip it off to about 1/2 inch, but make sure, this is kind of fraying, so it's a good idea to put, like the pattern says, put some fray check or some glue or something on the end so that it doesn't, make your zipper disintegrate. Oh yeah, and I guess I can put my label on here now too. Okay, so I'm going to take the time to snip this down to 1/2 inch, glue it, and sew my label just on the one piece. And then I'll come back and we'll close up the pocket. Okay, I put some fray check on here, trimmed it down, put my label on. This is ready to go. Now I have to put the other piece of the zipper pocket lining on. So I'm just going to pin this on here and sew around, and I'm not going to sew it to any of this part. So sometimes when you're sewing these, it's easier to fold it up and sew it this way so that you can see that you actually haven't got this caught in your sewing. So as you go around, you can make sure you're out of the way and sew it on there. Okay, now it's all finished. I've got my little zipper pocket here. And it's a real pocket. And on the other side, I zigzagged around once because I'm using cotton and I don't want it to fray. And then I sewed it with just a straight stitch. So this piece is finished, although I might put a mesh pocket on here yet. Might help things not rattle around in so much, but there's instructions for that in the pattern. We'll get to it soon. This is the back and our foam, and we're supposed to base this around here, and then we're supposed to sew our straps on. Now I made my straps a little bit longer, and the way I measured it was I put this around my neck like a collar. So these were hanging in my front. And then I put, you can see the whole thing was just like a shawl collar around me. And then I measured from my side seam of my shirt that I was wearing and up here, and I gave myself a little bit extra. So you always can measure yourself for these straps and see what you like to have, because after all, this sits on your shoulders, comes around to the front, And this webbing is supposed to meet up from the side seam, which is basically the back of the backpack, to your ends of your strap. So this will work out pretty good. So I've got my clips on here. This is the point where you realize you cut your foam a little bit bigger than your pattern piece here. And I've got my straps clipped on. So I'm just going to sew around, zigzag around. I think she uses a basting straight stitch, but I'm always in the habit of basting with a zigzag. So I'm just going to zigzag around this, and don't sew these in anywhere. You just want to make sure that you only sew around the edge so that the foam's attached. And don't forget to snip off any mistake that you made at the bottom by cutting the foam too big. Okay, this piece is done. I sewed it around. Oh, I still didn't snip off that extra there. I've got to snip off the extra. The straps are loose. So this piece I'm not worried about. Now when it comes to this piece, I do want to have a little mesh pocket in the bottom here too, just in case, you never know. And I mean, I could probably slide my iPad in here and then it won't flap around inside my backpack. So this is where it's going to go. First, I want to put some of this, I've got fold over elastic. You might not have that. You might have bias tape. But I'm basically just tucking it in here and I'm going to sew it down very carefully. So I'll cut off a length of this. I'm not going to pull or stretch on it because I don't want it, you know, I'm just going to leave it as is. It's going to be difficult enough to sew the mesh. And a matter of fact, I could even sew some interfacing on here too to stop the mesh from stretching. Just a little strip of interfacing on here. And then I can tuck that in. The interfacing will be a bit stiffer. And I can tuck that in here and sew this down too. It'll give me something to pin to and sew. So I'm just going to sew a little bit of interfacing on first, and then I'm going to sew this on. And then after we stick it on the bottom of this, and we make sure the bottoms are lined up, and sew around, just basting. I usually zigzag and cut the extra off again. This is just by Annie's lightweight mesh, and I bought a bag of it once and I've been digging in it ever since. So just to show you what I meant, I had a strip of interfacing I zigzagged on here, and it was easier to sew from the bottom because the feed dogs fed it through. And then that way it is a bit more stiff, secure, not stretchy, in order to put this on now. So then I can put this on top, and I can trim this down if any of it overhangs too. And I'll just slip that in there and pin it down. It'll pin easier to some interfacing, and I can sew that on. Remember to cut off any before you actually sew it, because you don't want this white stuff hanging out looking ugly. Okay, this might be the case where you wish you had some of that fabric bias double fold or single fold or whatever binding, but it worked out okay because I didn't stretch, and I was you can feel it's kind of lumpy there. I did the interfacing inside. So now we just put this on here, line up the bottom, the sides, and there will be some extra that we cut off. Okay, it's all pinned on. I'm just going to zigzag around the edge here and cut off the extra. And then we can move on to the next thing. This pack has so many options. You have to pick which options you want to make. And, you know, some will be done, some won't be done. I've got my mesh pocket sewed on now. She talks about a lanyard inside. I don't have any paracord, so I just used some more of this fold over elastic and stick a swivel hook on it, and I'll sew these down right now too. And just one more thing I'm going to try. You don't have to. Sometimes when I'm on the bus, I don't wear my pack on my back or on my shoulder. I grab it by the handle. So I'm going to try and sew this on here It doesn't feel too thick, but for some machines it might be really thick when this gets sewn into the seam of your pack. So if you're using this, give it a shot. I just made sure I could stick my hand through comfortably, right? If you do use it and it is too thick, you should be prepared to be able to pluck it out, rip it out, because maybe it's too much for your sewing machine. But I'm going to give it a shot and see how it works. And of course, it's sewn, and I forgot to like burn the edges or something to make it not fray, because this handle will fray. So I'm going to put a lot of glue on here and just let it dry so that this the stitches dry into the webbing. So next we're going to stick this strap onto the back piece. So I'm going to just baste this on here, and I better put a piece of paper or something over that glue because I don't want the glue on my sewing machine. But I'll do that seam next. There, it's sewed on. And you might notice there's a little bits of paper there. Well, that's the paper I used to go on top of the glue. I still have to clean my needle because my needle did go through the glue. But this is nicely rounded. It'll dry up. It won't be a problem for my next seam. And I've got clips in still. Anyway, I am going to clean my needle off and we'll take a look at the next seam that there is to do. Look what I found. I found my lining. Apparently I'm supposed to already have had my lining sewed on to this. So I will just do it now. This is my back. This is my back lining. So I will line up the centers and sew this on now. So you see the way it's going? This is going to have the lining sewn directly on. These are wrong sides together. So I will pin it all the way around and I will baste it all the way around. And then I think we can pretty much put the fronts and the backs together. Okay, just in case you did like me, I put my straps on before I put my lining on. So I'm going to sew my lining on. But just to show you, I've got this all clipped together so I keep it out of the way, because who needs that when they're sewing? So this way I can go all the way around and baste this down without running over anything. And I put paper on top of my glue because it's still wet, but that'll be okay. And it's sewed on. This is going to look good. Okay, we're on the home stretch now. I've got my back done, and it's got the lining attached. And I've got the front done, lining attached. And don't forget, before you attach your lining, if you wanted any studs or rivets or bling or anything on here, you have to do it to the layer before you put the lining on. That's mentioned in the pattern anyway. So, but I am happy with what I've got here. So I've opened up my zippers partially, but I want to keep my zippers out of the seam allowance when I sew. And I'm going to pull as much as I can through here so that I can keep it out of my sewing. Oh, I lost one. And you can clip it together a little bit too to make sure it stays. I can feel it. It's coming. It's coming. There. Now, we've got to line up our centers. And we have to, where did my center go on there? Right there. And we have to make sure when we're clipping around that we have these lying the right way. And our straps lying the right way. And as you're sewing, check too. Put your hand inside the hole and check to see that you haven't messed up your strap. So make sure your strap isn't being sewed down facing the wrong way. Okay, so I shall continue all the way around, clipping, and then after I'm going to baste these pieces together so I can put the binding on. I've got fold over elastic. So I'm just going to keep on clipping and then sew it. I just had to show you all my clips. And I also am wondering, am I the only one that has to have all my clips facing colored side up? Because it just looks prettier. Just change these few. I mean, what difference does it make? Does it make a difference? I guess the flat side sits better on my sewing machine bed. So technically, I guess it's a good idea, but I just like it because it looks good. Okay, time to baste. Okay, I've sewed all around with a zigzag just to baste it on. And, oh, I should cut this down a bit. I went around and I cut out any of the bits and pieces, like I should do this here. Any of the little bumpy parts here that kind of stick out that, you know, we want a nice smooth edge so that we can put our, well, I don't know what you're using, but I'm using fold over elastic. And then after we can place this on here and clip it to hold it. But also remember, as we're sewing, we're going to be stretching it, you know, especially around the corners here. So it might move, might go a bit loose, a bit tight, whatever. So I'm going to clip this all around just to hold it, and then as I sew, I'm going to pull on it just a little bit, just so it gets a nice tight finish to it. So I'll keep on clipping. One thing I will do is I'm going to leave this unsewn. Here, I'll find the other end here and show you. So I can sew this side down, but on this side, I'm going to leave it a bit overhang. And as I come up to it, I will fold it under and do it like that. So hopefully you can see that. This side, I'm going to sew down right from here all the way through. When I come to this side and I'm sewing, I'm going to fold it under so the edge is finished. And then I'm going to sew it. And that way it'll have a nice finished edge on it. Okay, so I am going to continue clipping it. And then we'll sew. And when I do sew it, I'm going to sew it with a zigzag stitch again. I want to make sure that it's on there well and it's crushed. I like having the edges of my things crushed down to absolutely nothing. Tuck this back in here again because it's really irritating when I hear that clanking noise. Okay, so I just had a thought. When you did your basting around, did you put your hand in? Because I did, and I ran my fingers along the inside edge just to make sure it was feeling the same all the way around, like a proper seam, that nothing was bent or twisted or messed up inside. I could have turned it at that point and check if my binding was good, but I think running my hand along it is probably going to be good enough. Now, these aren't enough clips to actually do anything because, like I say, when I zigzag around, I'm going to be either pulling it or loosening it as I go around. And you can see here, I have not cut off all this, even though there's tons here, because I don't know where I'm going to end up by the time I get here. This is stretchy. And same with the bias binding you can get. It has a bit of stretch to it too. So I want to know when I get to the end where the end is, not guess now. And remember, I'm going to, when I get there, cut it and fold it under and then sew it down so that it's got a nice finish to it. So I'm going to start with here and go around, and then we'll finish the end when we get to it. Now that was a pretty good baste all the way around. I can see I've got everything in there nice. I didn't miss any layers. I'm going to go around once more and make sure I have the proper seam allowance, and I'm going to sew around with a straight stitch now. And then, you know, because it's an outside seam, I want it to be not jig-jaggy like that, but actually a proper seam. So I'm going to go around one more time just with a straight stitch. So I zigzagged my binding on all the way around, and then I sewed with the proper seam allowance. Now I'm going to turn it through the hole here, the zipper, and check, because with all this width here, your sewing machine foot might have slipped off, and so you might have some raw edges exposed. If that's the case, turn it back again and sew just that little section, maybe just an 1/8 of an inch more or 1/4 of an inch more, just to get, you know, catching all the layers. It's surprising when you come to the end how many layers there are, because I mean, you've got the webbing and you've got the straps and you've got all sorts of things. So let's just turn this out now, and oh, I think I've got some clips here, and we can see how it looks. Okay, it's turned. I'm going to very closely look at where the webbing is and the straps are attached. Make sure that they didn't fall off, and I'm going to weasel out these little corners just a bit more. Oh, there's masking tape in here. I sewed over my key fob twice. So I finally used masking tape, because that means twice I've been sewing over it and unpicking it. So I finally put masking tape on it and taped it down so that I wouldn't sew over it anymore. So next we're going to get our little strap ends here and put them on here. I've got a D-ring here somewhere too. Here it is. I've got a D-ring to stick on, and this backpack thing that I found because I salvaged it off a backpack that had fallen apart. So I can use these on here too. Okay, now time for some fun and games here. I've burnt the edges so that they don't fray. I've wrapped it around a D-ring and overlapped it as she instructed in the pattern. The first mark here is where we're going to sew this right now so that this doesn't fall off. The second mark is where we're going to sew it onto our padded strap. On this end, we're going to attach, I've got something different than what she has in the pattern probably. Now, it doesn't matter with this which side is up, because both sides work the same for me. If you have something different, it might work differently. So this will do later. This just goes down and comes back up like she said in the measurements there. And you make the backs match here. And then when you flip it over, you sew it down. Again, there are two marks. One mark is for sewing this together. The second mark is for sewing it to your backpack. So now that I've got this all sorted out here, it's going to look like this, right? I'm going to sew on my lines to get this so that it doesn't flip-flop around and fall off. And then I'll come back and show you where I sewed it onto my backpack. Okay, I have sewed these on. As you can see that they're matching at the end. And like I said, obviously this doesn't matter. It has no right side up, wrong side up. And this has no right side up, wrong side up. So I am supposed to put this on the mark here that I can't make the mark because I can see it. It just sort of scratches it in there. It's right there. But nobody else can see it. Then I put this on here. And I can sew it down onto here using these lines, and she gave another line here that I can sew. So there'll be 4 lines that I sew through to help hold this on here. Where's my little mark? I think it's right there. Maybe a bit higher. So now I can attach this onto here, sew through all the layers. Okay, I've got it sewed on. It's pretty sturdy on there. Now, these things, you might notice I put tape on this one. That's the top. Okay. The thing that looks like, the difference is this doesn't have a hole in it here, but this does have a hole. Okay. So what you do is you put it through the one, oops, where's my end? You put it through the one that's close to the prongs, and then you put it through the second hole. And it's kind of loose to start with here, but when you attach it, we won't be able to attach it with my, this is the top sticky tape on it. When you attach it and pull on it, it's tight. So let's do that again with this one. This is sort of like a downhill slide in. This, there's nothing. You can't get in there. So let's stick this through the top and through the bottom, and then pull, and it's stuck. And there. So this piece of it doesn't have a top, right side, upside, downside. This piece does, because when you're finished, it's supposed to look like that. It's simple, but having that downhill slide and the teeth holds it in. Now, one more thing you might want to do before we pack this up is, I really like this system, but I'm always worried that this is going to slide off, work its way off, so we lose it. So either, just like up here, slip a D-ring on, fold it over and sew it, because then the D-ring, there's no way it's going to go through here, and you'll have another loop to hang something on. Or just fold it over a couple of times and sew it down with a little cross box, and then that way it won't go through, because you don't want it going through that slot. That's the last thing to do, is just to secure this end so that we don't lose it. So how'd that go? Make sure you share your makes with us. I'm a member of the Cork and Copper Designs Facebook group too, and I'd certainly love to see what you've made, what kind of materials you used, what kind of options you used, what kind of pack you made. Please share. We'd love to see it. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.